Sorry about that abrupt ending to the first part, but almost this entire review is made up of just talking about Thanos, so I thought that was a good stopping point. Anyways, let's pick up where we left off. When I first saw the movie, I didn't like the fact that the Thanos from Infinity War died within the first hour. You know, the one that the internet beamed into oblivion and that we establish a connection with. But by looking at the film through the mentality that Thanos is the hero, it changes the tone of Endgame. It transforms the film into being about a group of people made bitter by their own failure. They're so bitter, in fact, that they tear apart the fabric of the universe in order to change it to their liking, and pay the price for it. Even though this is a cool way to look at the film, it doesn't change the fact that arguably the best character from the previous film is now dead. I know that he comes back later on in Endgame. I don't really like this version of Thanos. It's not that I hate him, I just think that he was a better character in the previous movie. Thanos' plan in Infinity War was unique when compared with those of other villains. He isn't doing what he's doing out of revenge or because he's intent on intergalactic domination. He's doing it because he's convinced that it's in the best interest of the galaxy, and he's trying to prevent what happened from his planet from happening to others. He's even willing to sacrifice Gamora, the only person he's shown to care about in every movie he's appeared in order to obtain this goal. And his goal is shown to work. Gamora's home planet recovers from everything that happened to it, like how he mentions in Infinity War. And in the 5 years between Infinity War and Endgame, the Earth is able to slowly begin to heal because humanity is less of a problem. Of course, admitting the villain has a point is only a thing in the MCU when it's convenient, like in Black Panther, so why bother trying to understand why villains do what they do? They only do it because they're evil, right? Thanos' plan becomes a lot more generic in Endgame, and I understand this is because he's thinking on his feet because the plan that he put time into didn't work. But that doesn't change the fact that it's worse. The whole, "I will reshape the world in my image" thing is such a joke that TV Tropes has an entire page dedicated to it. Thanos doesn't feel as human or as understandable as he did in Infinity War. Sure, he has cool moments in this film, like wielding his double-bladed lightsaber or subverting expectations and punching out Captain Marvel instead of being killed by her. There are only 2 moments in the film where I legitimately felt for this character: the farm scene and his final scene after Tony's snap. The farm scene was not how I expected Thanos would die, and I wasn't expecting that the Avengers would kill him in cold blood like that. I honestly felt a little bit of myself die watching my childhood heroes rob and murder a defenseless man in his own home. I think that what makes it even more heartbreaking than something like the Vormir scene from Infinity War is that he's beginning to make reconciliation with Nebula, who he's mistreated and used like a pawn for most of her life. Nebula never reconciling with Thanos is legitimately sad. Add to this Thanos' final death, and I'm surprised I didn't cry at it. The silent destruction of Thanos' dream is just as powerful as the snap from Infinity War. I knew that it had to happen, but watching Thanos quietly accept his fate was just as sad as watching Peter Parker or Groot die in the last film. I'll miss Thanos, not only because he was a cool villain, but because he was a well-written, interesting character, and the best villain the MCU has to date. Now moving on from the villain, I think it's time to finally talk about the heroes of this movie, specifically Tony, Steve, and Thor. Iron Man's arc is interesting to look back on because it's probably the most radical change out of all the starting characters from the MCU. To see the slow transition of Tony Stark from a snarky playboy to someone who would willingly sacrifice his life to save the world is very interesting. What makes it more interesting is that even though he is trying to become a better person, he still makes a lot of mistakes along the way, because he's not used to thinking about someone other than himself. Is he able to do it right? Of course not, but his mistakes make him more human. Speaking of which, let's talk about Captain America. Steve Rogers has a pretty complex character arc throughout the MCU. His being brought from a world with black and white morality and being thrust into a world with a more gray morality is one of the more intelligently written arcs in the whole series. His constant struggle between trying to do what is right for his country and what he thinks is right takes such a toll on him that by the end of Endgame, he's sick of dealing with it. Now with the possibility of time travel, he just wants to go back to the world he's familiar with and finally get laid. I also think that the way he passed on the title of Captain America to Falcon was handled much better in the movie than it was in the comics. In the movie, Steve passed the shield on to Sam because he lived a full life and was able to carry on being a hero. I'm not sure, but I think that in the comics he got hit with some kind of aging ray, was too feeble to carry on being Cap. Until they reversed it, of course. The majority of superhero comics storylines are so dried out and dead. But getting back on topic, I like these two character arcs, even if a lot of people don't. However, we have yet to talk about the most controversial thing about the movie. Thor. I have no idea why this is the thing that fans really harp on. There are a million YouTube videos on whether or not Thor was ruined by this movie, and the only other thing that I've seen that has generated this much of a response from fans is Last Jedi. But that's a video for another day. If you pay attention to Thor throughout these movies, he does have a unique character arc. In my mind, Thor's character arc is, what does it take to break a god? By the end of the first Thor, he is set up as the perfect hero. In Phase 1, there's relatively little that separates him and Captain America in terms of role in the story. Both of them are fish out of water, but while one is like that because he's ripped from his own time period, the other is like that because he's from God of War. However, throughout the course of the MCU, he loses his parents, his brother, his girlfriend, his close friends, his home, and almost his entire race. Thor hides a lot of his pain by acting like a goofball, like how the way he does in Thor Ragnarok, which is something that I really relate to. In Infinity War, he has the perfect opportunity to redeem himself by killing Thanos, but he loses this opportunity because he's too consumed by arrogance. The moment that finally breaks him is when he has not only lost everything, but also his chance to redeem himself. And the only way that he can take out the big bad is by murdering him when he's at his most helpless. But I guess to some people, this wouldn't cause you to go into a spiral of depression that ends with you sitting on an island drinking beer and playing Fortnite. I don't know, it made sense to me. I like that Thor never really has a moment in Endgame where he's redeemed from this mistake, because it'll take a while for him to make up for his actions.